Hey everyone, welcome back. Expanding the Zone. This is show 61, and I'm Shayne Combs. He's Mac Holmes, and here on Expanding the Zone, we're into our basketball series. This is our third week of talking some hoops. And Matt, as I welcome you to the show, I guess we kind of hinted at this at the end of last week, talking officials this week, and a comment that had been released kind of started the discussion point for the two of us. But really, we've had some things in our notes that we thought started to blend into some other shows, and we just thought that this made a lot of sense coming off of some of the rule changes, and some of those rule changes that certainly were going to impact the game of basketball and impact the way it could possibly be officiated. So it made a lot of sense here. So as I welcome you to the show, why don't you kind of just roll it out for the listeners? And again, thank you, Dr. Chris Good, for the support on the YouTube channel. If you're not watching us on YouTube throughout the basketball shows, there's going to be times that Matt shares the screen and does some different things to offer certain things. So check us out over on YouTube if you haven't been able to do that. But again, we're also out there on the podcast app. So if you're listening along, we know there's a lot of options out there in today's time. We appreciate you making us a part of your week, and we hope we can entertain you a little bit with the game of basketball. So Matt, on that thought, again, welcome. Go ahead and roll this out for us.
Yeah, Shayne. So the way this show kind of came up, we did a show on the shortage of officials back on episode 10. So it's been quite a ways back, right? I think you said episode 61, right? So it's been many episodes ago. We did an episode on the shortage of officials in certain sports, how it had become an issue, and there was a comment that came out from the OHSAA the other day that kind of caught my attention and maybe struck a little bit of a nerve with me, if I'm being honest. And I thought it might make for a good show discussion. And it does have to do with the shortage of officials, and it has to do with fan behavior. This was released, and again, like you said, if you're watching on YouTube, I'll share my screen here. This was released by the OHSAA here recently, and I've highlighted this section. I'm going to read this because we have listeners too that aren't on YouTube with us. But this is a quote from the OHSAA Executive Director Doug Oot. Okay, I'm just going to read this quote first. Bad fan behavior can ruin a game, and we need to do something about it. We, meaning the OHSAA, have met with the student athletes, and the message we received is it's our game, and we need to try to get poor sportsmanship from the bleachers out of the game. We have an officiating shortage in Ohio, and the number one reason that officials get out of officiating is the abuse they take from the bleachers. We must create a more positive environment in our athletic contests. Now, let me say this. I'm just going to leave this screen up here for just a second so people can read through that. Let me say this first. I want to start with this, okay? I've personally met Doug Ute and honestly like him, respect him. He's a down-to-earth guy. My conversations with him have been positive. I think you're talking about somebody who took over at an extremely difficult time to take over. One, you had the whole COVID situation. Two, you had the popularity of the guy that went before him and Jerry Snodgrass, okay, who was extremely popular amongst coaches and school administrators. The way the OHSAA handled that or mishandled that, if you will, and his firing or them letting him go created a firestorm of like, man, he's getting screwed over. He shouldn't be let go. Who knows what all the reasons were, but on the surface, it looked like a guy who was really getting the short end of the stick, a guy that had done a good job, right? So now Doug Oot has to come in and take over for that. So it's COVID, it's following a really popular guy. I think he's done, Mr. Oot has done a good job at his job, okay? So I want to preface what we're going to get into tonight with that because I am going to provide some pushback. This comment here does bother me a bit, and I'm going to get into the reasons why. But I just wanted to make that clear first and foremost that it's the comment that bothers me, not the person who necessarily made it. Okay, let's really pick apart this comment first, Shane, before we get into it. Okay, because obviously some of this is true, right? The bad fan behavior can be an issue at times. There's no doubt about it. I'm not going to sit here and say that we don't have it at all. There is some bad fan behavior out there. Do I think it's the majority of the time? No, but it only takes, a couple bad apples, right, to spoil it. So I get that. The thing about the student athletes, it's funny to me. I like accurate information. So when we've met with student athletes and the message we received is it's our game. I don't know. I don't know how many student athletes sit down with the OHSAA and say, you know what, it's our game, and we want to try to get it back. I think those are words that are being put forth by the OHSAA that I don't really know if student athletes are saying. Okay, but that's neither here nor there. The part of this comment that really kind of sparked this show, Shayne, and what we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of this show is the part where it says that the number one reason for the official shortage in Ohio is fan behavior. The number one reason is fan behavior, is the reason we have shortages. And that's the part, Shayne, I want to discuss today a little bit. And that's the part, quite frankly, I disagree with. I think the problem I have with this comment is that while fan behavior might be a contributing factor, I'm not going to sit here and say that it never is. To sit here and just to say, hey, it's the number one reason why. One, I would love to know how they came up with that. What was the data collecting process that gave them the information? Was it a survey with officials who had quit? Was it a survey with officials that had yet to even, I don't even know how you would do that, yet to even try to become an official, or maybe people that had applied and then not followed through with their license? You know what I mean? I don't know how you come up with the fact that it's ranked number one. And I would also like to see in there, I would love to hear what is 2, 3, 4, and 5 on their list. If they've done this data collection and this research, what are the other reasons? Because I think we're going to touch on several reasons today as to why we have a shortage, Shayne. So that part of it kind of bothers me because ultimately, and I'll say this and I want to turn it over to you for a minute. Ultimately, it really minimizes what I believe is a complex issue. I believe the shortage of officials in Ohio, or maybe anywhere for that matter, is is complex. There's a lot that goes into this. And just to minimize it and say, oh, it's those daggone fans. It's the fans. It's those fans yelling at those officials. It's those, coaches getting on officials. It's players. It's just it's silly to take an issue that is so complex like this and just try to minimize it just because it makes for a good press read or a good soundbite. That part of it bothers me. So I guess what I want to do tonight, Shayne, and you take it kind of where you want to start. All right. I want to talk about really the true reasons why we have a shortage of officials and why it's important, and it can even be counterproductive the way the OHSA handles these situations with comments like these, and why it's important to look at all the issues and not just make these sort of generalized statements that aren't necessarily true.
Well, I think it's interesting, Matt, to look and I think about when we sometimes are guilty in things that we are in charge of looking at the negative side of things and trying to figure out a reason for like a lot of times in education, something I've been involved in now for 25 to 30 years, and it's a situation where I'll watch some really educated people, and they'll look at results, they'll look at data points, they'll look at behavior, they'll look at all sorts of different student performance types things, and their attention for whatever reason seems to draw to the negative. You know, where what I find when I look at certain things, Matt, I don't know what your experience has been. I see that we have 85, 90, sometimes 95% doing it a really in a real positive way.
Right.
It's a pleasure to get to go about it each and every day. Now, is there that 5, 10, 15% that does not act accordingly or does not do a particular thing? Yeah, but I have a hard time just saying, oh, those 5% are why teachers don't want to teach anymore. You see what I'm saying? I
Right.
think there's different fact. Now, does that weigh on them in the everyday grind? Yeah, sure. But as I start to look and I start to see different things and I start to see teachers make different things and choices and so forth, is there more to it? Yeah. So I think a lot of times, is, is it something? Sure. Is it everything? That's the strong statement. So again, the number one is the phrase that jumped out at me as you read that, and I thought that was really really interesting.
Yeah, and,
So,
and not to interrupt you, Shayne, let me, because I know you've got another point, but I want to really agree with what you just said too about how most of the people are doing it right, right? Use the education analogy, but as we talk about, fan behavior and stuff, and it only takes what's oftentimes, I guess, we just notice the negative, right? That's what I think what you're trying to say. I kind of call it my plane crash theory, right? Like every time a plane crashes, and I'm not trying to take a tragic event and make light of it. I'm not. Every time that happens, though, what it's on the news, right? We hear about it. Man,
mhm.
we had a plane crash. Yeah, you don't hear about the thousands upon thousands of successful takeoffs and landings, right? Because that's not newsworthy. Same way with fan behavior. We if a fan, runs out on the floor and attacks an official, it's all over national news, right? I mean, look at this. It's awful, which it is, but it's not newsworthy to talk about the games, all the hundreds upon hundreds of games that went off without a hitch, right? I mean, when's the last time on Twitter you saw, hey, tonight in Northern Ohio, we had a game that was really good sportsmanship between both schools. The fans treated each other well and everything went smoothly. You're not going to see that tweet put out, right? So we're only getting, and we live in a day and age of information, right? So we hear about every single one. We're only getting the negative, I guess. And again, I hope I didn't break your train of thought. I just wanted to agree with what you're saying because we're only hearing of the bad stuff. We're not hearing of the good stuff.
Well, no, I think that's a good point, and where I was going next, and it kind of relates to what you're saying here, is within that good stuff, still goes back to a foundation that I've been talking about on expanding the zone for 60 some episodes now, and that's relationships. I
Mm-hmm.
think what gets fractured when we're not careful, Matt, is the relationships that all work together to make this common goal work that everybody's after. And in my education analogy, it's the relationship of, say, a principal and teaching staff, or the teaching staff and their student body, or it's the teaching, the teachers and the community members, right? The parents and some of the people they work with. And whenever those relationships get fractured, I think you take a situation that certainly needs addressed and you start to compound it and you start to again draw to the negative, draw to the negative, draw to the negative. And I think what happens in this case, let me ask you this question. This is something, again, I'm throwing you on the spot here because we don't really do a lot of prep, as we always say. This was on my mind a bunch as we were preparing for this show. If you go back to when we played and we first started coaching, and I'd say maybe even 10 years into our career, I felt like coaches and officials, at least in the game of basketball, had really, really strong rapport, really strong relationship. Were there certain officials or coaches that would get at each other a little bit? Yeah, but for the most part, I thought there was a pretty strong respect, and I thought there was a pretty um, back and forth where there was a relationship to where they understood their roles as in the game, and even away from it, they were friends and they were cordial and they were different things. As time goes on, I feel like we slip away from that. And I feel like there's been a little bit through all this that's almost been like this. I don't say on purpose, but I feel like there's been a little bit of disconnect between the coaches and the officials. And and I feel like it's been fractured a little bit in terms of the ability to communicate and the ability to do some different things. So when we have these discussions, I feel uncomfortable sometimes, like that the coaches and the officials are even being put against one another. Like it's the coach's fault, or it's you, the athletic director. Why aren't you controlling your fans?
Mm-hmm.
Or does that make sense? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so it's almost like we're putting sides here instead of looking at it as we're all a team and we all have roles that go. So I'll stop there just to see how would you how would you describe relationships between coaches and officials now compared to when you got started? I'm just curious to see because I have two or three points I'm going to make throughout the show, and I'm just curious on that foundation where you stand on that.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I don't feel like, and I never felt like, truthfully, I never felt like the relationship between coaches and officials was all that bad. Maybe you disagree with that, Shayne. I felt like that's one of the relationships that sort of stood the test of time, because I think at the end of the day, coaches and officials do have a certain level of respect for each other. It doesn't mean that you agree with everything. And here's the thing. I'm not going to sit here, and it would be naive to even for people to even think this, to sit here and say that I respected every official equally, because I did. And I'm sure officials don't respect every coach equally. There were certain officials that I knew cared about their craft, worked hard to improve at it, put the time and effort in. I knew officials that I would see in the summertime working at a summer clinic or a camp, and they were getting evaluated and graded. And that would strike me as, wow, that guy really cares about how good he is at this, and it would make me, or I'd have officials call me and say, can I get the film from the game? I want to be able to see how we did last night. Again, that impressed me. You got guys that are wanting to take the time to get better. I respected those guys. Quite honestly, I didn't have the same level of respect for guys who it was a big joke. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to show up and make my money, I heard an official. I was in the stands last year. I'll just say it. I was in the stands last year, and I heard an official come over and it's like, yeah, I'd say to another guy, coaches are mad because I ain't calling fouls. I got beer to drink tonight. I mean, think about that for a second. Okay, that's an official saying that to it. Now, I'm not saying that to shine a bad light on officials. That's one bad apple. That's one guy. Okay, not even a decent amount of officials are that way. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that, like, as a coach, it's like anything else. You respect the guys that put the same effort in as you do and care about their craft the way you care about yours. So I guess what I'm saying, Shayne, is I don't know that relationship has really been severed, or even maybe changed that much. I think that now there's a lot of officials that have, like, when you get our age, a lot of the officials that kind of came up with you at the same time you were coming up, they retire or they get out of it, because one of the things, officiating basketball is physically demanding compared to officiating other sports. I mean, let's be real honest. You don't have to be in the world's best shape to officiate baseball, volleyball, track, maybe even football, depending on what position you're at, right? But you've got to be in pretty good shape to officiate basketball. These athletes are pretty good now. I mean, they can run the floor, and you got to be able to get up and down the floor a little bit. So I guess what I'm saying, as we get older, Shayne, some guys get out, and then there's younger guys that maybe we don't have that relationship with, and it takes time. But I don't know that part of it has changed that much. And I can't remember, there was a second part to what you said there too. I don't know if I covered everything you were wanting me to talk about or not, but the relationship in itself, I think, between coaches and officials is still okay.
No, that was the foundation. I'm glad to hear you say that. I haven't seen a ton of examples. I will say it's been a little different on the boys' side than the girls' side, but that may be a discussion for another day or maybe later in the show. I don't know. But I'm glad to hear you say that because I have seen examples where I feel like sometimes it's like we're trying to take this common goal where everybody should be looking at the same picture and everybody should be looking at the same goal. And I feel like sometimes we're putting each other against each other. I guess I look at it as there's certain levels of responsibility. You know what I mean? Like when you go from being a teacher to a principal to an assistant superintendent to a superintendent, when you look at running an event, there's an athletic role, athletic director role, there's a
Mhm.
coach role, right? There's an
Right.
official role. And I can remember being an athletic director and I can remember the importance. And I didn't know this right away. I thought, man, if I could just get, the officials in here for the junior high events, we'll have this as I learned real quick as a young coach and a young AD that if you really take time to hire great officials, they're going to come in and run a great event. Does that make sense? Like I
Yeah.
developed in a high level, as you said, for respect for officials because there were certain officials that we would hire that would bring a total comfort level to me when it was time for them to work our event. They were on time, they were professional, they knew the rule book, they were going to call, they were going to have conversations with the coaches, they were going to have conversations with the kids. They understood uh, certain fan behaviors, and they were able to pick and choose, what they were going to bring attention to and so forth. It was just a really, really well thing done. And I guess that's what I go back to, everybody understanding a little bit of the responsibility. I think there's been a disconnect on that. And you as a coach and as an athletic director, I just wanted your take on this. Do you feel sometimes we're all looking around at each other like, well, what are you going to do about that? Like, principal, what are you going to do about that student section? Athletic director, what are you going to do about that fan? Officials, are you going to let that coach talk to you that way? Does that make sense? It seems like there's a lot of people involved in a lot of these athletic events that it seems like there's almost a picture being painted, I guess, was my question to you originally about the coaches and the officials, that um, I just get the impression sometimes that everybody's not on the same page.
Yeah.
Am I way off on that, or do you ever feel like you've been in a situation where you feel like people that should be working together are kind of working against one another?
Yeah. Yes, I do. And I think I do think this. I just said I didn't think the relationship between the coaches and the officials have taken much of a hit. I do think the relationship between officials and then like ADs and administration has taken a little bit of a hit, only from this standpoint. There's in most league now, there's middlemen, right? There's assigners. So part of the relationship, you just said yourself, if I hired good officials, well, guess what? You're not hiring them anymore.
Yeah,
The
good
AD is
point.
not hiring them now. So now, instead of as an AD, I call up an official and I say, hey, can your crew work the whatever game's a big rivalry, you know what I mean? Ohio State, Michigan, right? But at the high school level, Uniota Zane Trace or Paint Valley Huntington in the SVC league here locally. Maybe it's a rivalry game. Hey, I need a good crew on this game. You guys available? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, now look, it's a rivalry game. That's why I'm hiring you guys. Let me know what you need. There's that conversation between AD and officials that used to take place that's no longer taking place now. And it's kind of like even scrimmages. Let's take basketball scrimmages. Think about how it used to be. It used to be officials they would work scrimmages to get better. Okay, they would work for free. Well, when we played in high school, very few officials got paid. Even when I first started coaching, got paid for for doing scrimmages. It was just, hey, we'll come do it. Give us the hot dog and a pop afterwards. We're wanting to get better. We're wanting to get in shape. And there was an understanding of, if I come work a scrimmage for you, you'll give us a couple games this year, right? I'll come work a scrimmage and you'll assign us a couple games. So again, it's that relationship between the coach, the athletic director, and the official. It builds. Like now, when those officials show up to do a game later in the year, you had them at a scrimmage, and a scrimmage is a little less stressful for everybody, right? So there was a little laughing going on. Hey, how you doing, man? It was like you built that camaraderie. Well, now that's not happening. Now officials get assigned to scrimmages. No, I mean, no, not that I know of. Now, no officials work scrimmages for free anymore, which I personally agree with. Let me just say that up front. When I was at Benton County, I started paying officials the full rate long before other people did, because I feel like they need to be paid for their time. If you have a scrimmage, sometimes officials work longer. Usually they work longer than they do for a real game, right? If they're going to be there for 2.5 hours, I think they deserve to get paid, the full rate. So I'm not at all saying they shouldn't do that, but just the way the process has changed a great deal. And I think that's part of the relationship too, Shayne. So the relationship between administration and the officials, or ADs and the officials, those have probably, just because of the process of how we do things now. I mean, as an AD, I'll be honest with you, I get a lot of officials to show up and do games that I don't really even know, or I didn't even know they were coming until 2 days before the game because maybe the assigner changed it on me. You know what I mean? So like a lot of times I'll be like, "Oh, you're my officials tonight. Shake their hands, thanks guys. Put them in a room. Let me know if you need anything." And there's not much relationship there between AD and official.
See, and that's interesting. I apologize to the listeners. Maybe I was all over the place with that first question. That's what I was
No,
trying to get to, and I thought with you being a coach in AD, you could really give a great perspective of that because that's what I was sensing, and I didn't know if it was me or if I didn't know. The assigner part of your answer is extremely interesting to me, and I'm sure we'll probably come back to that. Because the other thing I would say on the relationship part before we move back more into the topic at hand here is when you have a relationship with an official really understands what goes into coaching. All my years of coaching, Matt, I feel like again 95, 97, 98% of officials, they show up there, there's two teams playing, they're going to try to call you a fair game, and then someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, and they're going to go on, they're probably going to do four more games that week, right?
right, right,
For you, you're coaching, you were coaching Benton County every night for 20 years, right? You did care who won.
right.
you
Yeah,
you
yeah,
you put in hours. I mean, coaches, we put in hours and hours of film session, and we put in practices, and you talked about on the preview show team meetings and film. Like if we're doing a half hour film session, it probably takes the coach an hour to prepare for that film session, right? In terms of clips and all those things. So for every opponent, the amount of investment that goes into that travel call in the middle of the second quarter
right,
is going to be far more meaningful than just the official that makes the travel call in the second quarter, right? So
right.
my point was in the best officials that I ever worked with, and in the ones I had relationships with, and they understood how much I put in, I respected how much they put in. We could have a discussion. It's no different, Matt, than it's no different than two friends who would argue and then be able, like teammates, right?
Mhm.
We can argue and then turn right back around, respect each other, and go. And I think that investment is to go. I think it even goes over into fans sometimes. Now, do fans say things over the top that are a bit much? Yeah, but let's face it, fans are passionate. Fans are invested. Parents are invested. Parents
Yes.
have a lot of time, a lot of money. They love their kid. They're out there. They want them to win. They want them to succeed. They don't want to see them get called for fouls. They don't want to see them mess up. So those are things that coaches have been dealing with forever and a day, and those are things that officials are been have been dealing with forever and a day. And I think that the officials who have that connection and understand that investment, it goes a long way in terms of how they manage the game. I say so before we even get to some of the other factors. When I hear that fan behavior is the number one cause for the shortage, I guess that's the part that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. Is well, where's the relationship with coaches fall into this? Where's the relationship with ads fall into this? With administrators, are they upset about crowd control? Are they upset more about, is it a particular thing that cross a line where they feel like they're being attacked individually? Is it, so that's the thing I just try to unwrap a little bit as I start to break down that quote.
Yeah, so I do. Before we get in, I've got several points as to what I think the real reasons are why we have a shortage of officials, or more important reasons than fan behavior. Let's talk about fan behavior for a minute, Shane, because you brought it up right there again. So one, I think we got to look at two things on this. Okay, one, is fan behavior a lot worse than it used to be? Okay, and if it truly is, all right, then why? Okay, so for me, and I'll give you my opinion, and I want to hear yours. I think fan behavior as a whole has gotten a little bit worse. I don't think it's nearly as much worse as what people would like to lead you to believe from, say, 30, 35 years ago. Listen, since the beginning of time, fans have yelled at officials. Okay. I mean, that's the silly part of this. For officials to come into the game now, well, I don't want to be an official because the fans yelled at me. Well, then that's ridiculous because fans have always yelled at officials. You knew, I mean, watch TV, watch anything. Officials get yelled at by fans. That's part of it. Coaches, I mean, like, would you have got into coaching if you know if your goal was for everybody to like you? For every parent to agree with you, for every fan to agree with you. I mean, coaches and officials aren't all that much different. We both catch abuse. Okay. There's, believe me, there's people in the stands saying that coach doesn't know what he's doing. And same as with officials, right? So I think we have to look at, you know, since we've always had that type of behavior, why all of a sudden is fan behavior labeled as worse? Now, I think one of the reasons is because of what I said earlier. We see on social media and media, we see the worst of the worst, which, by the way, when you see these videos of an official or a fan attacking an official physically and those really nasty things that are just awful, make sure you take a look. Is that an AAU game or is that a high school game? Because what I think's happening with a lot of these really nasty situations, they're occurring in places where there is no administration. These AAU tournaments, these youth tournaments, they're occurring way more in those situations than they are at your average high school where there's principal, superintendent, athletic director, the security that's been hired for the game. You know what I mean? Because at a high school event, you have all that. You have police, some of these AAU events, you don't have that. I mean, I've showed up as a sixth grade basketball coach. I guarantee you, well, I show up to my first game next week. There's not going to be police there. There's probably not going to be a principal there. It's just going to be a bunch of youth coaches running a youth event all day long. That's where you run into situations. So, one, I think you got to be careful of saying just in general, well, fan behavior is a lot worse. It may be somewhat worse, but it may not be as bad as you think it is. You and I've talked about the sportsmanship in terms of student sections, in terms of player to player. I think it's better than it used to be. I mean, players as a whole treat each other better. Student sections, we've got into before, used to say some outlandish stuff back in the day, right? I'm not seeing nearly as much of that anymore. So, so I think we have to, one, ask ourselves, how much worse is it? And then get into maybe why if it is worse. So I guess my question to you, Shayne, would be, do you think fan behavior is a lot worse? And if so, why?
My first reaction when I think of the last 30 years, I think sportsmanship is way better. I mean, I would go as far to say way better than it was, you know, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago. I just unless I'm missing something, I mean, when I think of the way schools interacted, players interacted, um, student sections, even the way administrators had different people. It was more, even how they interacted. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a far more cohesive. Hey, let's work together. To try to make this things were much nastier a generation ago, in my opinion, and more times than not. Does that not mean we still have some situations today? Yes, but I think sportsmanship's come a long way. I think fan behavior is probably similar in a lot of areas. I think probably the way it's interpreted today is different. Right there.
Right.
Let's face it. There, the way you talked um, publicly in your job place 25, 30 years ago would probably been deemed okay, where if certain people said certain things, today, that would not be acceptable,
Right.
right? I think we've come a long way as a society in terms of what's acceptable language or acceptable things to talk about, or acceptable things to address. So I think as a society there's been a big change. So I think a lot of the fan behavior is just interpreted differently today. Um, there are certain things that are obviously out of line. There's certain things over the top. But the hey, you're terrible, or that's call the travel, or foul and one. Those things have been going on for a long, long time. You know what I mean? And I just think sportsmanship as a whole, when you think of the way student sections are conducted, when you think of the way um, the principals act toward one another, the ads act toward one another, all those different things, I think is way ahead, unless I'm missing something. That's the way I interpret it.
Well, yeah, no, I tend to agree with you. And let me ask you this: if, and I know we've got some points we got to get to here, but if, and this is going to maybe be an unpopular thing for me to say, but are there times where officials, okay, some especially less experienced ones, but maybe do they add gas to the fire, so to speak, of fan behavior with the way they react to it? Because I guess, and maybe I'm not remembering correctly. Sometimes, when we get older, we remember our generation as, oh, we did it right back then. Who knows? Maybe I'm not remembering this right. I just don't remember a lot of fan like ejections. I don't remember a lot of like referees turning and addressing the crowd when I played as a player. I don't remember much of that. And over the last few years, I've seen some concerning things and even our assigner in the league I used to be in was concerned about this too. I mean, he honestly told me that one day. He's like, we've got officials now, instead of, let's say a fan gets out of control, whatever you deem out of control is, okay, instead of going to an administrator and saying, hey, that guy over there in the red hat, he's got to go. He's cussing at me, he's yelling at me. They'll go to the guy in the red hat. Hey, you're out of here. You know what I mean? Well, now you've become confrontational with a fan. So now you've made it a thing like you versus him. Now as an administrator, it puts me in a terrible spot. I got to come running in there with deputy and get this guy out of there instead of just coming to me during a timeout and saying, hey, that guy over there, he's got to go. You know what I mean? They don't handle it that way. Most officials now make it a huge dramatic thing, like, and they bring attention and they point up in the crowd, and you've seen it. You've seen it a lot. So I think now I think officials used to be more thick-skinned, truthfully, and they just kind of ignored that stuff. Where now more officials are like, I'm not going to take it. I'm kicking that guy out of here. And it's become this, I don't know. And maybe it's the society we live in, like you just said. Maybe we used to just sort of overlook and accept things. And now we try to maybe, well, that's not right. And I'm going to fight that. Maybe that's that whole mentality. I don't know. But I see some of that, quite frankly.
Well, no, I think you make a good point, and I think we say it in terms of, again, we're highlighting the top 80, 85, 90, 95% of these officials. You know what I mean? Like, again, the really good officials, that their ability to control the event. Yeah, we talk in education all the time. I tell a middle school teacher, well, why are you fighting with a 13-year-old? I mean, like, we're trying to
Uh,
de-escalate the situation. You're right.
right.
I've had too many examples to tell you how many times a parent, as an administrator, just cussing at me, just giving me the walk forward. And I still have a standard that I have to talk and return to them. I can't
Right.
return the same dialogue or conversation or even tone with them, right? I have a
Right.
standard that I have to uphold as a coach. How many times have you had just a parent come down wanting to address you about playing time, or does you have a standard in the way that your school that's hired you to coach expects you to conduct yourself and talk, no matter how much they're coming at you. So I think those things are very, very fair. That's where I have great respect for the officials that have done it for a long time, because I do think they have a unique ability to understand that they're coming in and they're in charge of a particular event that night, and they're going to they're going to run that event, and the good ones have a way of just controlling that particular scenario that you're describing. I think that's spot on, but I think that's true in all professions. And the point that you made that I guess I would go back to is, when you sign up to be a teacher, when you sign up to be a teacher, that kids are going to misbehave.
Right.
When you sign up to be a behavior, the parents are going to cuss at you. When you sign up to be a coach, that parents are going to be mad about playing time. When you sign up to be an official, that, hey, there's going to be some fans every night I go in that are
Yeah.
going to tell me I'm not very good.
Yeah. Yeah. Shayne, as we dive into this, I want to just hit you with a couple things on my list, and maybe we can kind of go, just kind of work through this. So back to our original topic, and I'm glad we just had that discussion, because I do think it goes with this. I do. but why do we have shortages? Okay. And I feel like there's a lot of reasons that are way more pressing than fan behavior. All right, that's really the original purpose of this. Okay, so I want to get into these and get your opinion on them. The first one I would say, honestly, is just kind of a common sense approach to this, and it is that we live in a society right now where people don't work. I mean, if I'm being real, and if you think about the shortages with officials, it started right around the time, and maybe some of this was COVID related. I hate to just everything was COVID, everything blames COVID, right? But like people like stopped working as much. I mean, all you got to do is drive down your most major road in your town and look at all the restaurants, and every single one of them has help wanted, now hiring, looking for work. You know, when's the last? I mean, think about the service maybe that you've received at a restaurant over the last 2 or 3 years, and how much that's changed. I mean, I'm not at all restaurant snob. I was joking the other day. I'm not real picky. Obviously, if probably why I have a few extra pounds on, right? But when I go to a restaurant, I'm not one of these guys. It's like, oh, the service was terrible. I mean, I don't really care that much. Just bring me my food or whatever. But I have noticed. I mean, I have noticed at times you show up to a restaurant, man, it took us an hour and a half to kind of get through tonight, and it's like I showed up to a store. I showed up to a store just about 2 weeks ago that said it was open till 8 o'clock, and it's 6:30. Sign on the door. We didn't have enough workers tonight. Sorry, we closed early. I mean, this is like a national chain. You know what I'm saying? And it's like it's we live in a society where that's going on, and I think it's filtered down to officials too. I think that there's a number of officials that got into officiating because of the fact that it's sort of a side part-time job, especially younger guys. Think about it. If you're a college student, you get into it, man, I can make a little extra money on the side, and I'll officiate. And now the guys that did it for 30 years, they did it for love of the game. It's not just the money, obviously. But like some people get into it as sort of a side gig, and all of a sudden they don't have to get into it for that reason anymore. Like, man, I can make probably just as much money going down here and doing this. So now you have less. I think it's a societal thing. How about schools? This is a principle. How hard is it to hire teachers right now? You know what I mean? Like every school, you could step out of your door, throw a rock, and you could hit a school administrator that could not find teachers this year. You talk to any of them. Were you able to hire all your teachers? No, man. We had to consolidate a couple classes. We couldn't find them. Every school faced this. Okay, so I think part of it is just it's kind of unfortunately where we're at right now as a society where the people don't work.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's why I think it was so important that we had the discussion early in the show is to highlight the things that we're coming up on that we think are probably more. What we wanted to do first was talk about that quote, and then we wanted to try now to transition into the way. And I think you make a great point. We're guilty of it in our profession, Matt. I think there's a lot of people that like the idea of being a coach more than they like to actually do coaching. You know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
one of those where, hey, I help out a little bit there. Oh, you know me, but do you want to show up, 2 3 hours a night? Do you want to watch film? Do you want to go scout? Do you want to go,
Yeah.
do you want, I mean, it's so I love the point you make. I think there's incredible officials out there, but officiating's hard. You don't just pick up a whistle. Hey, listen, I've tried to officiate in the summer. I've tried to officiate some different things, and I feel like I know the game pretty well. You know what I mean? But
Right.
like when it came to officiating, I struggled with it a little bit because I didn't have the eye for officiating. I had the eye more as a coach and to love the game and to
Right.
do, you know, I respect totally how hard it is, as you said, athletes getting bigger, faster, stronger. So one, you're needing more and more officials. So now we just start handing a whistle to anyone that wants it. You see what I'm saying? And I
Yeah.
think what that does is that leads to the different things that you talk about when you get into the little league settings and so forth. So I think you're spot on. Don't you also feel like because of the work situation, we come a time you said you started paying different people for scrimmages and so forth. I have a hard time, no matter how much you love it, no matter how much it's for the game and all those different things. I have a hard time believing that the financial and the compensation isn't the foundation of a lot of these different things in terms of what people put into it, what people get out of it, and how bad they want to get better at it and advance in it has to have a lot to do with what you're making, doesn't it?
There's no question. I mean, look, everything starts and stops with money. I mean, well, I shouldn't say everything, but a great deal of things. And I don't think there's any difference here. I think officials. I mean, first of all, it's a supply demand thing, right? So, the OHSA is telling us there's a shortage, right? Well, officials hear that, so then, oh wait, it's time for me to ask for more money because it's supply demand. They need me worse than I need them. So hey, if you want me to come work that scrimmage, I mean, there's officials that have declined contracts for $40 for a scrimmage. Yeah, I'm not going to work it. Pay me 75 and I'll come work it. Okay. Well, it's a supply demand. They can ask for more. It's like being a free agent, right? It's like, I mean, in all honesty, it's like, so we're going to have to look and listen, the last couple league meetings I've been in as an athletic director, what's come up? Do we need to raise what we pay officials? It comes up all the time. And we'll look at what other leagues are paying. Oh man, they're paying an extra $20 a game. No wonder we're not getting officials. They're getting all so there's this constant, what are we paying officials? What do we need to pay them? And look, you could argue it both ways. I mean, you could sit here and say, okay, you're a varsity basketball official. If you're looking at just the time you're out on the floor, you're making $30+ an hour. Okay. I mean, you're making $75 for an hour and a half of work. Now you have to drive there and to and from, sure, but we all have to drive to and from work. So you can make the argument that the pay's not that bad, but the fact of the matter is the going rate is the going rate. You know what I'm saying? And it's like if these are all the officials that we have, and this is what they're telling us we have to pay for them to do games, we're kind of at that mercy a little bit. If we don't up our rates, but there's what people don't understand about compensation is it's a domino effect. Okay, we're going to pay officials more. Well, we have to raise our ticket prices. Well, now the community's yelling and screaming, and our school board's mad because the community's mad, right? And our administration's like, oh, we don't want to raise ticket prices because we want to take care of our people, which I get that. But all of a sudden, your officials cost more, your equipment costs more, right? As an athletic department, you start to wonder where that money is going to come from. So it's not just as easy as to say, let's pay officials more money. But you're exactly right. The compensation, if the compensation improved, it would certainly help the situation. It's like anything else. If go back to my restaurant analogy, right? The restaurants where you're going to get the best service are the restaurants that pay their employees the most and get the best people. You know what I mean? And it's going to be that way in any line of work. Uh, the more you pay, better people you're going to get.
Well, no question, and I think it comes back to you're talking about schools. I think that the schools a lot of times when you look at that, the teacher that's searching for the job, they have three, four options a lot of times if it's someone that interviews pretty well. I remember interviewing a teacher. This has been 2 or 3 summers ago now, and we'd literally tried to offer the young lady the job 2 hours later, and she had just taken a job at an interview that she went to after ours. You see what I'm saying? So
Mm-hmm.
it was one of those where, again, like the point you're making is when you have those particular for the longest time, Matt, I can remember them saying, well, such and such school paid this. They're the ones that are going to get the first crack at officials, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then after they have their Friday night officials, then everyone else could try.
Right.
So it's one of those things where the money thing has been a talk for a long, long time. But I have a hard time. Maybe we ended up burying the lead a little bit, but I didn't want to lead the show with what's money. That was the first reaction I had probably to the question clear back at the beginning. But I wanted to start with the quote, and I didn't want to bury the lead. But I just think it's very naive or kind of blind to think, and this isn't a knock on officials at all. I think we're all that way, right? I think we all, coaches are grossly underpaid,
Right.
especially the assistant coaches beyond the head coaches. The assistant coaches are some of the most grossly underpaid people for the hours they put in in anything. So, to me, I just think that's the big thing, and I feel like there's some fixes to the problem when I look at we live in a day of advertisement. We live in a day of creative ways to make money. I watch people all year long in sports, man. I'm sure you had it happen as an AD where businesses would say, hey, well, wait a minute, let me donate this Friday night once you let your students in. Yeah, right.
Right.
Like, it's just there's different ways to be creative. I think sometimes money becomes too much of an excuse for us as administrators and as schools when it comes to doing what can make certain events better and getting better people involved to make these events higher level. And that's where I'm hoping that we're entering a time where we're willing to become more creative and not making money such the excuse.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think that it's always going to be a factor. But like you said, we've got to try to find ways to not make it the factor. Shane, so far we've talked a little bit about what schools can do to help with the shortage and the real reasons behind the shortage as it relates to schools, maybe more so than fan behavior. I want to touch base on a couple things too. I think the OHSAA and I think officials themselves have some responsibility in this too. Okay. And we don't have to take a ton of time on this, but I do want to mention it. One, as I was talking to some officials and was talking to an assigner from another league, uh, one of the things that came up was that the OHSAA at times could simplify the process a little bit for officials, or even maybe make it a little easier, maybe less expensive to become an official. Because what's happening too is, officials have to pay their dues. They have to reapply for licensure. I know there's been situations where officials were late or missed a deadline, and then they were told, well, you can't officiate this year because you missed your deadline. Well, I mean, here we have a shortage of officials, and now you're not extending any grace to maybe allow them, to do it. You know, the I had one baseball official told me it cost him $800 to become a baseball umpire, because by the time he got his licensure, he bought all the equipment. Baseball's a sport where you have to have a little bit more equipment to umpire, right? So by the time he did all that, he had that level of investment in it. So I feel like too, sometimes, the governing bodies could do some stuff to help with this official shortage too. And the other thing, I'm going to combine these 2 points and let you dive into them. And the other thing, we talked about relationships between schools and uh, officials. What about the relationships between officials and an official? Because a lot of that stuff affects this too. Make no mistake. We are not seeing nearly as much of the older officials mentoring the younger officials, or the younger officials even be willing to be mentored. I was talking to one official that said the JV officials used to hang around after the game and stay and watch the varsity officials and then sit in the locker room with them and discuss what was going on and learn from older, more experienced officials, where now the younger officials are like, I'm not doing that. And they hop in their car and go home. And so there's this disconnect between officials too. How many times as a veteran coach, Shayne, have you tried to help a younger coach? I've done that, right? A younger coach will come to me and say, how do you handle this situation? Or what do you do here? And we'll talk. And I can't tell you the number of veteran coaches that helped me along the way when I was coming up. Okay. If we don't have that mentorship between older officials and younger officials, there's a disconnect there too. There's officials that are upset because they don't feel like they can advance because, and I'm throwing a lot at you here, okay, but because the voting process for tournament games is quite frankly a joke at times. Okay, that stuff that officials and ads are voting on, that is not what's completely selecting officials for tournament games. That's why you go to a district tournament, you see the same guys working 2-3 games over the course of 4 days, and these younger officials aren't getting a chance. I've had younger officials show me their grades. Here were my grades, and I got one girls sectional first round game. You know what I mean? We're not allowing the younger, because it's kind of a good old boys club in some districts. Like, well, these guys have been doing it for years. We're putting them on this game instead of actually going by those rankings. So my point is, there's officials that are upset with the process of it. They're upset with the inability to advance. They're upset because they don't feel like veteran officials have their back or trying to teach them. So these young officials are just like, well, screw it. I gave it a try. I can't advance. The older guys don't like me. I'm getting out. So that's part of it too.
Well, I love what you're saying there because like I mentioned a couple times, I felt like I was tripping over top of where I wanted to start back at the beginning of the show. And as the show has gone on, it's made more and more sense to think what I was trying to say there at the beginning was the relationship of all the parts involved, Matt, I think really need to be reestablished at the core. You know what I'm saying? Like when
Right.
when you talk about the officials growing together and the coaches growing together and the ADs growing together, and then the way they interact with one another and the way they work and how you get better and all of this different stuff and it's professional development. So everything we're talking about kind of goes, and I think that goes back, if I was following what bothered you the most about the quote was we've been sitting here for almost an hour show and talking about this. It's a little bit of a public relation type thing just to say, hey, here's the number one reason why.
Right.
Okay, but you know what I mean. Yeah,
Right.
what else is there? So I think the show has done a nice job of bringing all of that together. If people will kind of piece each part of this together, because at the end of the day, we need great coaches, we need great officials, we need great athletic directors, right? And then we need a strong OHSA at the time. We we live we live in a world as administrators and coaches of people understanding that it takes different layers of people to be successful, right? Like
Yeah.
principal can't be successful without teachers, superintendents can't be successful without principals, you know, ADs can't be successful without good coaches. Coaches can't
Right.
be successful without good players and parents. It and that I think that's what we have to attack this type of question with the shortage of officials. Could fan behavior be a little bit better? Well, absolutely, it could be. Behavior could be a lot better in society, period. But I don't know that that's the end all in terms of why people don't want to pick up a whistle and go officiate high school basketball.
Yeah, no, that's exactly, you hit it on the head. What bothered me about the comment originally was we took a very complex issue, one that we've spent this time talking on, okay? One that we have come up with, and we could probably talk longer than we're going to, right? Relationships matter. The work shortage itself leads to it. How much we pay leads to it. We've talked about OHSAA's role maybe in expenses and licensure and maybe some things they could do. Relationships between officials and other officials, the ability for officials to advance. I mean, we've touched on all these things over the past hour, Shayne, and that's what bothered me when we're just going to throw a soundbite out there because like that's not what we need to solve this problem. In fact, I think it adds to the problem. I'm gonna touch on that when I come to my final thoughts. But before I do, I want to make sure there was nothing else that you wanted to hit on.
No, I think the thing I have left would be for my final thoughts. So go ahead once you kick us off
Well,
there.
let me say this then. Yes, my final thought for this would be, and this is the most dangerous thing about the comment that we started the show with by the OHSAA. Okay. I feel like the OHSAA inadvertently, all right, is hurting the situation by saying some of the things they say about official shortages when it pertains to fan behavior, coaches' behavior. And let me explain what I mean by that. If you're not careful when you put all this stuff out there, you think you're trying to help, but you can actually hurt by sending a message to up and coming officials about how bad it sucks to be an official. If you're not careful, think about it. You're putting stuff out there. Hey, we have an official shortage. We need more officials. But keep in mind, the fans treat you terrible. The coaches treat you terrible. It sucks to be an official. Now I know that's not what they're saying, but in essence, that's the message they're sending, Shayne. Like we need more officials, but every time you turn around, if you're a college kid thinking about becoming an official, but every time you turn around, the OHSA is putting something out about how bad you get treated as an official. Man, the sportsmanship's terrible, the fan behavior's terrible. Think about it. If you're on the fence, you're like, I don't I don't want any part of that. It's kind of like I've told parents this before. You'll get a parent on Facebook. Let's just take a like cheerleading. Let's take cheerleading. Now, this didn't happen. I'm just using this as a example, but I've seen it happen in other sports. Man, our cheerleading program at our school gets no respect. You know what I mean? Administration doesn't care about it. Community doesn't support it. You know, we don't have good coaches. I mean, our cheerleaders work hard and they get no respect. Well, now think about that. If you're a girl that wants to be a cheerleader, you know, what do you think? Well, man, I don't want to be a cheerleader. So this parent who puts that out there, in essence, in their mind, is trying to get more respect for cheerleading. You understand what I'm saying? And they're hurting it because now people are going to be like, well, I don't want to be a part of that. They don't get any respect. If you're not careful when you put stuff out, it's counterproductive. It actually works the other way. You know, it's kind of like it's kind of like when a politician endorses another politician. Well, you better hope it's the right politician endorsing you because that might hurt you more than it helps you, right? Who's that
Yeah.
endorsement from, right? So I don't think at all that's the OHSA's intent. And matter of fact, I know
No.
it's not. They want more officials and they want fan behavior to improve. And I'm not saying that. I know they do. In their hearts and minds, that's what they want. But I don't think the way they're going about it is helping the situation at all. In fact, I think it could be hurting it.
Well, I love the direction you went with that because I guess the word I was going to talk about was being an ambassador for the game. I think you and I, the one thing we share throughout all of the different things, we agree on more than we don't. But there's certain things you and I disagree with in high school basketball or in high school sports or in whatever it may be. But the passion that we share is we're at the end of the day we're an ambassador for education, we're an ambassador for high school sports. We believe in what they do, and I think we have to be people in a solution based environment that promotes the future of these areas. And you just said it. You know what I mean? Like, how do you get more people involved in coaching? How do you get more people involved in officiating? Well, you promote it from the ground up, correct? You know, it excites me. I have a baseball player who took his classes, be a license. He goes out and umpires stuff in the summer. You talk about helping yourself as a player. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things, and having the knowledge of the game and doing different
Right.
umpiring and things like that. I think it's great. I think I would love to see us bring more young kids along and have them try to, if we're going to have to play all these little league games, bringing some younger guys along and getting them into officiating at the younger levels and bringing them up and into junior high. I think it'd be a great way to go. But at the end of the day, when you start talking to the adult level, I have a hard time believing that we don't have to get more creative in money. You know, we all try to volunteer, we all try to give our time, we all try to do those things, but I feel like a huge solution base to this, Matt, is being very creative in our financial situation to where we can compensate officials correctly, and we can, just like anything else, you're not going to pay someone in 2024 what you paid them to do it in 1994
Right.
or in even 2014 for that matter. You see what I'm
Right.
saying? So like that's just the reality that we're going to have to recognize, and we can't just say, well, we don't have the money. That's not going to work. So we're going to have to figure out a way to be creative, and we're going to have to figure out a way to move forward in these areas. So that's where I would close it off. I feel like we've done a fair job of looking at the quote in the first half of the show, and then starting to break down what we feel like are more of some of the factors, and even tried to offer some solutions as we go forward. Anything I'm missing?
No, I think we covered it a lot. I think you're right. I think we do have to be creative. I think the OHSA has done some things in that area, and for instance, trying to promote officials classes within high schools. And I know some schools
Mhm.
are doing that. We're trying to do that at our school now, and I know a lot of schools are doing that. So it's not that all parties aren't trying to do some things. I just think there are some things we're missing. And I think that's kind of what we were really trying to hit on tonight is let's be careful to not overlook the finer details by just kind of generalizing. But no, yeah, I think you're right, Shayne. We're all going to have to kind of get creative, not only financially, like you said, but just in the way we attack these things. But no, it's been fun. I mean, it's always fun to talk sports. And sometimes we our topics are just sort of for fun, and today was a little more serious, but I think that it's the more we kind of kick these ideas around, the more we all grow.
Well, again, we appreciate everybody, Dr. Chris Good, the support on the YouTube channel. Check us out on the YouTube channel. Check us out on your podcast apps. Expanding the zone. We have some great ideas for basketball. This season should be a lot of fun. We're going to be breaking down certain parts of the game, certain matchups. We're going to be talking about different aspects of the film room, all sorts of different things. Should be a lot of fun. So on that note, we'll get on out of here. He's Mac Holmes. I'm Shayne Holmes. We appreciate you listening to Expanding the Zone.